Hello, this is Joey Botello from Ruthless Performance Motorsports, your turbo performance specialist. Today we're going to discuss how to choose a turbo kit for your Suzuki Hayabusa, Suzuki GSX-R 1000, Kawasaki ZX14R, Kawasaki ZX10R, your Yamaha R1, and pretty much any other motorcycle, even the new Harley-Davidson turbo kits that are coming out. The first important thing you need to know before choosing a turbo kit is understanding the terminology. Out there is way more disinformation than there is information. People have this idea that you can simply type in something in Google and boom, the first thing that shows up on page one is what you should do. Or even worse, going on message forums and listening to a bunch of people who probably haven't even installed a turbo kit and heard something from someone they know, and the information is just not viable. You really need to be speaking to or listening to people who know exactly who they're talking about, and that's not the guy who's put one turbo kit on his bike. You need to speak to and seek the advice of people who work in the industry or are constantly building turbo bikes. There could be someone at home who's building a number of different bikes for racing, road use, whatever, but you just do not want to listen to bench racers. There are simply too many people out there that they do is read what other people have written online or heard some stories from someone else, and they're giving you that information. They didn't obtain the information because they know what they're talking about. They haven't done this with their own hands. They haven't put a turbo bike on a dyno and seen how it reacts to tuning. They're just repeating something they heard. And this is by far the most valuable lesson I can teach you, is not to listen to them. Only listen to people who are qualified to answer questions about turbo kits, because that's what they do. They live, eat, breathe, and even go to the bathroom thinking about turbo kits. Now, before you start attempting to choose a turbo kit for your bike, we need to go over some terminology so you understand the different things that are discussed when wanting to buy a turbo kit. And the first thing you need to know are the different stages of turbo kits. Stages are generally broken up because of the horsepower rating that they can achieve. Also, different stages of turbo kits have different parts that allow you to run higher horsepower and allow you to control the boost more efficiently. We'll go into each turbo kit stage independently, but the main thing you want to know about stages of turbo kits is the amount of horsepower you'll be shooting for once the turbo kit is installed. The first and most commonly sold turbo kit are generally called your stage 1 turbo kits. These are entry-level turbo kits that make anywhere between 230 horsepower to 280 horsepower. These kits give you all the pieces you need to install a turbo kit on your stock bike, including the header, the turbo, the plenum, the wastegate. Some have a blow-off valve, some this is an option, and the exhaust and plumbing. And one important distinction, the vast majority of stage 1 turbo kits use an FMU to control the fuel as opposed to a one-to-one rising rate fuel pressure regulator. And they also generally employ something like a dyno jet power commander to tune the factory EFI computer. Although there are different options out there, you don't have to use a power commander. There are a number of different other manufacturers that have what you'd call like a hacking box that pretty much just allows you to make corrections to the EFI computer that your factory bike came with. It just makes adjustments to the parameters that are already in the computer and doesn't actually adjust the computer. But that's the general thing you need to know about a stage 1 kit. You get your basic, all the parts for it, and you generally get a map that'll help you get an initial tune before you want to send it off to dyno. These kits are basically what 80% of all people who want to put a turbo kit on their bike are looking for. You're looking for some crazy power on the street without having to take your whole motor apart and install expensive internal components and have expensive aftermarket computers being used. Generally, if you're looking for 230 to 280 horsepower at the rear wheel, a Stage 1 turbo kit is what you're looking for. Next, you have your Stage 2 turbo kits, and these generally produce anywhere from 250 horsepower to 450 horsepower, depending on the manufacturer. Generally, the biggest difference between your Stage 1 kit and your Stage 2 kit is fuel delivery and fuel management. Usually, Stage 2 kits come with what is called secondary injection. Now, you might ask yourself, what is secondary injection? Basically, in the plenum, which replaces your airbox when installing a turbo kit, they install 4 extra injectors, one located over each throttle body, and an aftermarket ECU that runs those 4 fuel injections based on 2 parameters, which are usually RPM and boost. In these turbo kits, basically your factory EFI will control the operation of your motorcycle throughout the entire RPM band. But once boost is seen by the boost sensor, then your secondary injection, your secondary computer then kicks in and will compensate and provide the additional fuel enrichment needed for once you're in a boosted condition. Your factory fuel injection and factory computers are usually not going to be able to compensate for these levels of horsepower ranges that you're looking for with your Stage 2 kit. Although, with the advent of the ECU flashing, the Stage 2 kit and Stage 1 kit can kind of be combined by certain turbo manufacturers, since secondary injection is no longer needed. With the ability to reflash computers such as the Suzuki Hayabusa can now employ the use of a boost sensor and map sensor, as opposed to the normal map sensors that come with motorcycles that only read vacuum to zero boost, zero vacuum. Zero vacuum indicates a wide open throttle situation with the bike, and is generally as much gas that will be pumped in for whatever RPM range. But through the use of a boost sensing map sensor and EFI computer flashing technology, such as on the Generation 2 Hayabusas, the idea of Stage 1, Stage 2 kits does get a little mixed up, because now there's no longer a need for an FMU, and in some situations not even a need for secondary fuel injection, as the Hayabusa on the Generation 2 models have an extra set of fuel injectors. With those 8 fuel injectors, you can generally just switch out injectors and use flashing technology to accomplish this. Now you have your Stage 3 turbo kits, or a lot of people refer to these as the race turbo kits. This is for the person who's looking for about 350 horsepower to 550 horsepower of more. These turbo kits generally use the same type of fueling as a Stage 2, but usually have a much larger turbo, such as your GT35Rs and your GT40Rs. Those are nomenclature used by Garrett turbos, but most people know about the size of the turbo you say when you're talking about this. These turbo kits certainly need extensive internal modifications to your motor to keep them from handling the obscene horsepower levels that you'll be able to realize with a Stage 3 or race turbo kit. As I said before, these generally are for the people who want obscene amounts of horsepower on the street, or they definitely want to compete in some form of racing, be it quarter mile or Bonneville or the Maxim Mile, something along those lines. You're going to want to look into like a Stage 3 turbo kit or a race turbo kit. At Ruthless Performance Motorsports, we only sell turbo kits from manufacturers that we have thoroughly evaluated the turbo kits that they produce. We've installed them and we've tuned them. We generally do not advise anyone to be going on eBay or trying to put turbo kits yourself unless you're an experienced turbo kit designer or builder. The turbo kits that we sell at RPM come from RCC Turbos, Velocity Racing turbo kits, your Han Racecraft turbo kits, but what we're going to be talking about in this segment is your top of the line turbo kits, which would be your custom-made turbo kits produced by Ruthless Performance Motorsports, your Ultra and Super Ultra RCC turbo kits produced by NLR, which is Next Level Racing, and also turbo kits produced by Big CC Racing out of the United Kingdom. When you're looking for the best turbo kits available, by far, you're looking at a custom-built turbo kit or your RCC Ultra and RCC Super Ultra kits, your NLR kits, and your Big CC Racing kits. These are not for your everyday consumers. These kits are for the consumer who wants the best kits available. I'm not going to make distinctions upon which one is better than which kit. You could go by who's winning the most races out there with their particular line of kits. RCC Turbo's Ultra and Super Ultra kits have won many, many titles, and so have your NLR kits. Sebastian Domingo from NLR is greatly involved in racing, and also you've also seen the Pinks episode with Mike Slow and Jason Miller. Those turbo kits were, I believe, both provided by Velocity Racing. I may be wrong on that, but if you're looking for the top of the line, beautiful billet aluminum plenums, custom-made headers, custom-made wiring harnesses, you're going to want to be looking at companies such as RCC Turbo, NLR, Big CC Racing, and of course, Ruthless Performance Motorsports. We custom-build turbos and make custom-built wiring harnesses for your application. Next, we'll be discussing fuel management. Now, fuel management is accomplished by two particular parts: your fuel pressure regulator and the means by which you're adjusting the electronic fuel injection on your motorcycle to compensate for the additional air that's provided by the boost that your turbo does produce. Now we're going to discuss fuel pressure regulators, and there are two different types of fuel pressure regulators that are employed in turbo kits. The first and most commonly used, and which is used in mostly stage 1 kits, is your FMU, or fuel management unit. Now this provides a disproportionate amount of additional fuel pressure for every 1 psi of boost, meaning if you have it adjusted to a certain thing, you'll get 1 psi boost will give you an extra 3 psi of fuel pressure to compensate for the additional fuel flow. This generally will allow your stock fuel pressure fuel injectors to provide the adequate fuel needed to supplement the additional air that's being put in your motor by your turbo. These are generally controlled by your power commanders. Now your second type of fuel pressure regulator, which are on all your stage 1 kit, your stage 2 kits, your race kits, and your high-end kits, and that is the 1-to-1 fuel pressure regulator. Now what this does is give you 1 psi of fuel pressure for every psi of boost. So every time you add an additional psi of boost from your turbo, your fuel pressure regulator will give your fuel injectors an additional psi of fuel to compensate it. You're generally going to set your fuel pressure regulator to 40 to 43 psi, and then for every pound of boost that goes up, you get an additional psi of fuel pressure. The reason for this is as fuel pressure goes up, there's a disproportionate in air pressure to what the fuel injectors are set at. Atmospheric pressure, which is actually 14.7 psi, which is considered zero vacuum or 0 kPa. As you increase the pressure for every bar, which is another 14 psi, for every psi you go up, you need to increase fuel pressure in direct proportion of that for your tuning to be done correctly. So that's essentially what a one-to-one fuel pressure regulator does. For every 1 psi of boost added, it'll add an additional psi of fuel pressure. The next component to fuel enrichment is the means that you're going to use to tune your EFI system. On your Stage 1 turbo kits, generally this is done through the use of a DynoJet Power Commander or a similar tuning computer that plugs directly into the factory wiring harness and just basically modifies values that are going in and out of your factory EFI. This is needed to provide the additional fuel requirements generally during boost conditions, although you will want to use this to actually lower fuel pressure in certain areas, especially with dump pipes, which have a lot less back pressure, so there is the need to actually lean out in certain areas. But the most important is the fact that these allow you to increase fuel or richen up fuel in certain areas of your map table. The next form would be your ECU flashing. This is a new advent. It's only been around for about 5 to 10 years. It wasn't readily available that long ago. It's really only been available to the mass public in the last about 5 years. RPM is a distributor of Woltrick Racing, which makes a great line of EFI flashing computers, which generally allows you to actually hack your factory computer and change the fuel demands depending on which map you're looking at. There's generally usually a map for RPM versus throttle position and an RPM versus map signal. And also depending on the model motorcycle you have, such as your Generation 2 Hayabusas, you can actually use a boost sensing map sensor, which will allow you to have a very wide control over your fuel and timing tables, and is now actually one of the best methods of configuring the fuel demands for your computer. As we've talked before about Stage 2, there's also something called secondary injection, where you allow your factory computer to run most of the operation of the bike throughout the entire RPM band. And when boost is applied to the system via the turbo, then an extra 4 fuel injectors that are located generally over the 4 throttle bodies with the use of a secondary ECU, which basically runs the 4 injectors based on RPM and boost signals. So basically those extra 4 injectors are not doing anything until boost is seen by the secondary computer, and then you can generally just tune the secondary computer on the dyno, just allow the factory computer to do what it's doing throughout the RPM range, and only tune the secondary EFI during on boost dyno sessions, or if you're using data logging at the track. But with this option, you do not have to do anything as long as your bike is tuned properly with the factory ECU. You will not have to make any adjustments, only with on boost conditions. The final and best thing you can do would be to employ a standalone ECU. Now, not everyone's going to want to cough up the money for these, because they generally start around $2,000 and go anywhere up to $5,000. These basically replace the factory computer using all the factory sensors and give you complete control over all your timing tables, all your fuel tables. When your fans turn on, you can also use these to control anti-lag, control a two-step, control boost control electronically. Basically, if you want everything to be done in one box, a standalone ECU is the way to go. The next thing you're going to need to know is your wastegate. Do you want an internal wastegate or an external wastegate? There are pros and cons to either one. The internal wastegates come on a lot of manufacturers' stage 1 kits, and they save a lot of space. They're much smaller than an external wastegate. They only have one port going in that basically, as boost pressure goes up, once it gets to a certain level, it'll open the wastegate, which will allow exhaust to flow out the exhaust without going into the turbo, making it so the turbo no longer produces more boost and reaches overboost conditions. Then you have your external wastegate, which are generally plumbed into the header or a port built right into the side of the turbo. If there isn't a port on the side of the turbo, one can be drilled in and having an adapter welded right to the housing of the turbo. These generally, they have more parts, so they're more costly. There's more plumbing involved, but there's a very high degree of control over these, and many of your higher end and electronic boost controllers work only with the external wastegate. So essentially, if you just got your stage 1 kit and you just want to go on a street and you're just going to set your boost to one level, an internal wastegate is more than adequate. If you're going to be employing things such as changing boost depending on the gear, or if you're using an electronic boost controller which is going to ramp up boost based on either gear or time or speed, you're definitely going to want to invest in a kit that has an external wastegate over an internal wastegate. Boost control. Now, this is a subject that for some reason is very rarely talked about until you actually have to deal with it. Now, there's 3 general forms of boost control. You've got your bleeder style boost controller. These are employed with your internal wastegates. The way they work is in the boost line that's coming from your plenum to your turbo, you put inside a little device that essentially bleeds off boost. So the more boost you're bleeding off, the less boost that your internal wastegate is going to realize, meaning the higher boost level your turbo is going to produce, because it's going to take more boost to be able to open up your wastegate, because you're bleeding out some of the boost that goes to the wastegate. These are generally the kind of things you'll find on eBay. They're just a little tiny valve that bleeds off pressure, and is also the common form of upgrade you see done on cars. Now you have your pressure regulating boost controller, which is a very simple way of controlling boost on external wastegates. It's basically an air pressure regulator that you'd use in compressed air systems, and you connect it to the top side of the external wastegate, and as you control how much boost the top of the wastegate sees, that's what will determine how much boost you'll see. So if you're only allowing a certain amount of boost pressure to be placed on the top side of an external wastegate, eventually the boost pressure going to the bottom side of the wastegate, after the spring pressure has been overcome by that boost pressure, and then the additional boost pressure from the bottom port of the wastegate is over and above the spring pressure and the pressure being distributed into the top of the wastegate, then the wastegate will open and boost will no longer rise. This is a very simple and cheap way to control boost in your externally wastegated turbo system. Now, by far the best means of boost control are the electronic boost controllers. Many EFI systems come with an external port that allows you to control a single solenoid, which will control how much boost is being placed into the top port on your external wastegate. It essentially works on the same principle as your pressure regulating boost controller, but essentially it pulses this solenoid in much the same way you'd pulse a nitrous solenoid. The more pulses, the more pressure that's going to go into the top of the wastegate, and that raises the boost level of the turbo. Now you've got your very high-end, the electronic boost controllers, and pretty much the only one I deal with, the only one I'll even touch, is the one from Next Level Racing, or NLR. These are the best boost controllers available. You've got your record-setting AMS 1000, which is just a phenomenal unit. It allows you to control every little aspect of boost. When boost comes on, what gear it comes on. You can have different maps for different gears, for different times. Um, there's literally thousands upon thousands of options you can program, and these are for either if you want to have the best boost controller on the street, you can actually use the pressure from the plenum to control the boost controller, or if you want to use compressed air, that'll be your most accurate form of controlling the boost, as the pressures are much higher in compressed air. So there's little to no variation. What you want to see at the top side of the external wastegate is what you're going to get. Whereas suppose if you're using manifold pressure, as the pressure increases, things change a little bit and it's not quite as accurate. And the only boost controller that I've ever seen to exceed the AMS 1000 would be the AMS 2000. Now this is just your top of the line. It plugs into your USB port. You can control everything via computer. It is just amazing. And then they also make the AMS 2000 Pro model. This has all the bells and whistles. If you want to race and you're serious about racing and you're serious about competing and you're even more serious about winning, then the AMS 2000 Pro Edition, that is your only choice. The next piece of information you're going to need is on turbos. And this is a very widely overlooked section, as you've got many different turbo manufacturers and designs. The general two forms of turbos are based on the bearing systems they employ. You've got your journal bearing, which uses compressed oil pressure to form a film around the internal bearing system, and then it's drained out the bottom. And this pressure actually works the exact same way as your rod bearings and your crankshaft bearings. There's oil forced in between the small amount of clearance that's between the main shaft and the bearing surface, and the turbo basically rides on a film of oil that's under pressure. Your upgrade would be your ball bearing turbos, which actually have actual ball bearings pressed inside, and the main shaft of the turbo rides on your ball bearings. Obviously, not all are the same. You have your the initial ball bearing turbos that came out, but now we're coming out with ceramic ball bearing turbos and even barrel ceramic ball bearing turbos. Generally, these will spool quicker and will deal with a lot more heat. Generally, the ceramic will spool quicker and deal with more heat than your ball bearing turbos too. Also, ball bearing turbos are less susceptible to having varnish buildup, because if you're screwing around on your turbo, if you just raced or you just blew down the highway and then pulled over and just shut off your bike, the turbo is just going to cook the oil that's inside of it. Your journal ball bearings are more susceptible to this, but this is also something that can happen in a ball bearing turbo, so you definitely want to consider that. Also, and the most important is who is manufacturing your turbo. If you're buying your turbo off of eBay, it's most likely coming from China and it's garbage. You get what you pay for when it comes to a turbo. There's no cheap turbos out there that are good. I'll just list the turbos that we use because we know these are top of the line, high quality turbos. First and foremost, we really like the KPA turbos. These are made in America. You can get them with billet center sections, aluminum exhaust housings in a variety of different dimensions. They come with billet wheels, twin tip technology, they are just a great turbo. Then you've got your benchmark, your Garrett turbos with your T3, T4s, and their GT line of turbos, all very good turbos. Next would be Borg Warner, who produces a lot of turbos for automotive manufacturers and is a very high quality turbo, and there's a lot of innovation in their new turbos. You also have Tile Turbo. They create great housings, and you can purchase phenomenal turbos from them. Also, we also enjoy using Comp turbos, Turbonetics turbos, Precision turbos, and Force turbos. Basically, buy a quality turbo. This is the main component of the turbo system, and if you're going to be pulling a turbo out of some junk car in a junkyard or going on eBay, then just forget about it. If you're going to start from right from the beginning with an inadequate, mismatched, or low quality turbo, you are not going to be happy with the turbo kit on your bike. Your turbo is the most important part of it. Make sure you thoroughly investigate who is the turbo manufacturer and what options are you getting with that turbo. Next, we need to talk about the option of intercooling. As far as I'm concerned, intercooling is something that should be considered by anybody except those who are looking into just your basic Stage 1 turbo kits. If you're going beyond Stage 1, some form of intercooling is something you should certainly consider. First of all, you have your air-to-air intercoolers. These are the ones you see in the front of the import sports cars. They look like a aluminum radiator. Generally what happens is as boost pressure is forced through these, the air going through the intercooler cools off the air inside the intercooler the same way the air outside your car cools off the water inside your radiator. These are very efficient, don't require any additional parts, and you see these a lot on your MC Express kits. They sell a great kit that has an intercooler built into it, mounts right in front of the factory radiator, or on your custom-built turbo kits, you'll usually see them hanging out the side of the turbo of the bike, usually on the opposite side that the turbo discharges from. Now, your next form of intercooling is your water-to-air intercoolers. These, in my opinion, are the best because water is a much better heat exchanger than air is. So the water that goes through the intercooler core absorbs heat at a much higher rate than air going over an air-to-air intercooler core. Although with these kits you do need plumbing for the water, you need a water pump for the water, and you need what is called a heat exchanger. Heat exchangers are generally either custom-made units as sold by RCC Turbos, or most other manufacturers will just use a factory radiator, cut it to about 1/3 the size, and put the additional fittings you'll need to pump water through the heat exchanger, through a water pump up into the water-to-air intercooler core, and then back into the heat exchanger. These by far, I think, is the best way to go. All the bikes that I ride, my personal bikes, all have water-to-air intercooling. The next form is not technically an intercooler, but I'm just listing it under intercooling, and what we're talking about is water or water and meth injection. Now basically what this does is it shoots water into the intake charge of your turbo system, and what this does is as the water is in your combustion chamber and the heat and pressure in your combustion chamber converts the water to steam, the energy that is exerted to transfer water from a state of liquid to a state of gas is absorbed, and then that actually lowers your detonation threshold, meaning you can run higher boost on the same fuel octane simply by having water injected into the airstream. The next would be your water to meth injection, which is essentially the same, except you're not using all water, you're using water and methanol, which is a form of alcohol. This not only cools off the combustion temperature, but also puts in methanol, which is a high octane fuel that is extremely detonation prone. Well, not prone. It does not detonate when a lot of heat and ignition advanced are used. And you also have the ability to shoot straight methanol in, or methanol injection. All three of these injections work the same. There is additional tuning required with water or methanol injection, especially with methanol injection, because you're also introducing additional fuel into the combustion chamber. So you're definitely going to want to provide for that in your EFI tuning by leaning out while the methanol is being dispensed into your motor. There's also companies out there that provide progressive water methanol injection systems that will actually give you more water and methanol depending on RPM, boost, or depending on how sophisticated the computer is. There's a wide variety of different parameters you can use to actually inject more or less water depending on the variables used. So even though water methanol injection is not technically intercooling, it gives you the basic same result at a much less cost as opposed to air-to-air intercooling or water-to-air intercooling. One important thing to note is also, does the turbo manufacturer that you're buying a turbo kit from, do they offer options? What you want today may not be what you're going to want in the future. Most people think, I could never want more than a stage 1 turbo kit. That is just too much power for me. You're thinking that because you haven't been on a stage 1 turbo kit or a stage 2, stage 3. After a while, you are going to get used to the power and you're going to want more power. So if you're looking for possible upgrades in the future, it's best to look at turbo kit manufacturers that offer upgrades that'll allow you to step up the performance of your turbo kit, and also additional upgrades such as full exhaust systems are available, and also blow-off valves, which we didn't cover. Most people know what a blow-off valve is. It's the piece that makes that noise when you're switching gear. Essentially, what it does is, as a throttle body's closed and there's no boost pressure under the throttle bodies, but there's boost pressure in the plenum, in the up pipe from the turbo, so that pressure doesn't go back and hit the turbo, which can either slow down the turbo between shifts or even dramatically stop the turbo, which can actually snap the main shaft of the turbo. It releases the pressure into the atmosphere, or they actually make some that you can plummet back into the intake side of the turbo, usually after the air filter, but before the inlet of the turbo. So when you're looking for turbo kits and you know you're going to want some future upgrades, just see what those particular turbo kit manufacturers are offering as far as upgrades to their kits. Well, now you have information that will allow you to intelligently choose a turbo kit for your motorcycle, or at least a beginning place to look before you start doing research on different turbo kit manufacturers and have a better understanding of the interworkings of a turbo kit. Now, you could go and do a bunch of research on a bunch of different turbo kit manufacturers, or you could always visit Ruthless Performance Motorsports at www.ruthlessperformancemotorsports.com, or give us a call at 508-801-3601. Just give us a call, let us know what kind of bike you have, what type of riding you plan on doing, what kind of horsepower you're looking for, and or what kind of racing you plan on doing, and we're going to sell you the best turbo kit for your budget and for what you're looking to accomplish. Once again, this is Joey Batello for Ruthless Performance Motorsports.